DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Jamie Wall from RNZ kicking off our Super Rugby wrap-up again. We're going to have Christy Doran on later on, Jamie. He's a good mate of yours as well. And great line from you that I read over the weekend, that them Tars were celebrating like they'd won something like a World Cup.
Yeah, that's right. It was a great game, to be fair. And I guess any game you win on the final hooter, you're going to celebrate extra hard. But just to remind, I think it's worth reminding Christy that that was the worst New Zealand Super Rugby team they beat by 1 point. But still, great for the competition. I think that the next stage for Super Rugby Pacific, from an objective point of view, is for the Waratahs to be a relevant team, given that it's the biggest market that Super Rugby Pacific has, and potentially get back to a point where they're capable of winning it again. So good to see. I know I personally, just from a New Zealand perspective, I'm quite stoked that we kicked off with a really good Australian showing.
Look, I started the podcast slash show by saying that I thought this was the best opening round that I've seen since I can remember. I don't know, because every game had something on it and every game kept you there till the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely it did. I think it was two of the games were decided after the final hooter had gone, and all of them were close. And even probably the least aesthetically pleasing game, which was the Blues and the Chiefs on Saturday night at a rainy Eden Park, was still intense. Like, it was still there was a lot riding on it, and there was a lot of feeling out there. So I think just across the board, it really probably ticked as many boxes as it possibly could. And the best thing about it is we're not sitting here on a Monday morning and talking about the referees or something, or the TMOs or something stupid like that. Like how last year, even though we had a really good game to start when the Chiefs and Crusaders played in Hamilton, afterwards we were talking about those bloody mouth guards they were wearing.
That's right. Yeah.
It's awesome just to be sitting here talking about a great weekend of rugby.
And that's what it was. And again, we've got to calm the farm, and that, look, the players will get better and their skills will get better and their mistakes will be less and everything else. But I want to go straight to that game that you were at Eden Park and the intensity of that game. Bruising it was, wasn't it? And just for a first game of any competition, to see the players as committed as that, I thought Clayton McMillan and the substitutes was just, I don't know whether it's genius or how much pre-planning had gone into that, but it just worked perfectly for them. And to blank that team in the second half on their own pitch, playing almost like their kind of style of rugby. Yeah, I mean, the Chiefs have got to take a hell of a lot out of that. Yeah,
and you hit it on the head with basically saying that the Chiefs fought fire with fire. They went in and they knew they were going to be up for a massive forward battle, and so McMillan picked his team accordingly. We did ask him afterwards, were you doing a Rassie Erasmus kind of bomb squad thing there? And he actually said no, he was just rewarding the guys who had been through the whole preseason with a start. Yeah. And that completely makes sense as well, because that's a really deep Chiefs team. Like, even though he had, 5 All Blacks coming off the bench, that's still a team that's good enough to win any Super Rugby game that he was putting out there. So good on him for doing that. And you could say that those guys came on and made a difference at the end of the game, but I really think that the guys who started the game set the tone defensively for what happened in that second half. So really good squad management there by McMillan, because as we know, Super Rugby Pacific is a competition that really comes down to how well you can manage the attrition rate that comes with it. Look,
there was something almost, can I say, Ireland-like over the last year or two. Let's take out this year's Six Nations, but the way the Blues played, that, almost refusal to try anything different other than what had previously worked for them. And I wonder whether that's going to rearrange Vern Cotter's thinking in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think so. Although got the feeling out of him post-match that the Blues just kind of didn't have their heads in the right spot. And in order to play that game plan at a necessary level, you really need to be super committed. And, just a little bit of a hint from old Vern that maybe that his players sort of are believing their own hype a little bit. And I feel sorry for them this week, because they're going to absolutely cop it at training, I think.
So, a couple of players to make mention of. Damien McKenzie, who we know is just a super talent. Whether he's got exactly what it takes to be pragmatic enough to be an All Black first 5, that remains to be seen. He hasn't quite got to that level yet. But at the same time, late in the game with an inch of space and his ability to look at a situation and react accordingly and score those tries at the end. I mean, here's a guy that at his very best is an absolute must-have for the All Blacks, but also is at a level now. I don't know whether he's actually got better, but I think maybe what I saw certainly on Saturday night was I loved the way he was reading the game.
Well, I've seen enough out of him at the back end of games now to think, like, man, this is a guy you want to have on the park, because if you think back to Twickenham last year, setting up that try, kicking a sideline conversion, the game in Dublin as well,
he was great.
Played a leading hand in what was a really tight win there as well, and now over the weekend. So I mean, the guy's just proving that he's a big game player, and it was an interesting one playing fullback rather than first five. Although across the game he did pop up at first receiver enough. So I feel like McMillan's kind of running a very interchangeable thing, and it's probably not the last we've seen of Jacob getting a start at 10. But I think we're going to see a much stronger team, full-strength Chiefs team put out this Friday against Crusaders.
So I want to talk about the Crusaders-Hurricanes game in a second. Did we see the two best teams on Saturday night still, you think, after everything that you saw over the weekend? And I know it's only one round, but I've ranked them 1 and 2 at the start. And look, I'm not going out on a limb by saying that. I've still got them obviously at 1 and 2, even though that the Blues lost. To me, these are the two teams.
I mean, I think so. I mean, because we've only had a sample size of 1 week.
Yeah.
So going back to last season and looking at the talent that both of those sides have. I was actually at the Crusaders Hurricanes game on Friday as well.
I didn't know that.
Which is a really good occasion. But just again, looking at that Crusaders team, we talked to Rob Penny the day before, and he was talking about injuries and how they've got, I think it was like 13 guys sidelined. He still put out a team that had more All Blacks in it than non-All Blacks. So if you look at the squad depth that the Crusaders had, you have to sort of rank them up there, because I think we're going to know in a couple of weeks that last season was very much a blip for the Crusaders.
Our heart sinks when you say that.
Well, you knew it was coming.
You knew it was coming. It's like the Aussie cricket team. You know it's coming, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas you look at the Hurricanes and but don't get me wrong, the more unheralded players that played for the Hurricanes, probably the best on show. Callum Harkin at fullback was really good. And then, and even in the Crusaders, having Kyle Preston come off the bench, guy scores 3 tries. So it's just about how much you can get out of your squad. And if you look at the names that these teams have on their books, then you can start to figure out how much of a force they're going to be later on down the track. And it's unfortunate that just for the Hurricanes, and the Highlanders, it just doesn't go that deep.
Jamie, from what you saw, and it's, you see so much more when you're actually there, in your mind again, were the Chiefs and the Blues better teams than what you saw from the Crusaders and the Hurricanes? Not to say that they won't improve themselves over the week, but did you just get that feeling?
Probably. Yeah, probably. I think just because of the lack of disruption that they've had, and that the Crusaders are kind of starting again a little bit, that it is going to take a little bit of time for them to find their feet. Whereas the Hurricanes are just kind of trying to do what they did last year, but with more depleted numbers. So that's how I'm seeing it. I think there's sort of a clear top 3 have emerged. But if you're going to listen to the Australian pundits, I mean, they'll give it to the Waratahs right now, right?
Well, I can't wait to ask Christy about that. Having said that, all 3 of their teams won, mate. When's the last time that happened in opening round?
I don't think it's ever happened before. I mean, I know that was the first time the Brumbies had ever... the Brumbies were the first Australian team to actually beat the Drua at home. So there's that. The Force versus Moana was, like a great game to watch. But I think both of those teams need to sort their defensive patterns out before they start going and playing other teams. Was really impressed with what I saw out of Moana, though. The guys that you wanted to see play well, and not just Artie either. Jackson Garden-Bishop, I thought,
what an
had a
addition
really
he
good
is,
game.
mate. Yeah,
Pipistano Patafilo out on the wing as well. He's a new player that's come in as well. So, there's hope there for Moana. It's probably not going to happen like overnight, but it was a promising start for them.
Having said that, up by 14 a couple of times during the match, up by 13 with 10 to go and playing against 14 players. I mean, that's a game that they had to close and should have closed. How much of a worry is that they couldn't do that?
Yeah, it was. I look at the back end of that game, though, and the fact that the Force managed to go, what was it, like something like 23 phases at the end, in stinking hot weather, and it just was. They just had enough class on the field with Donaldson, who was a Wallaby, let's not forget, to be able to figure out a way to get through there. So, yeah, it's annoying because it looked like Moana had put that game away with like 10 minutes to go, but they'll learn from that. And, I'm sure that like Artie, and that's the first time that he would have lost to the Force. Actually, the first time that he wouldn't have beaten the Force by like 40 points. We'll have some stern words for them this week.
I'm going to bring this one up with Christy as well, mate, but that rolling maul that the Brumbies do, I just hate this part of the game. I really do. And I don't get the fact that the guy at the back can get overtaken by his own teammates who join in front of him. How is that not against the rules somehow? How does that work?
Yeah, I know. It's just one of those weird situations where in rugby where the rules are, I guess, just completely at odds with themselves. I think that, though, you can't be too surprised. The Brumbies have been doing this for years. And before that, if you remember way back in the day, back when they were a real force with Gregan and Larkham and George Smith and all that, they were criticised for the way that they just kept running the ball really close to the ruck and with those little short passes. So I think that they're a team that has always just identified what they're really good at and just stuck to it. And I kind of don't blame them for it because, if you look at their results over the years, they have been a relevant team. They've been the most relevant Australian team. They always make the semi-finals, and they pushed the Chiefs a couple of years back and almost made the final.
Jamie, going back to the Chiefs there, since you mentioned it, confidence-wise, what does this tell them? Remember that they started off last year by beating the Crusaders side. And I remember that game because in the second half, the Crusaders scrum came alive. And all of a sudden, I think I remember watching thinking, hang on, here they come. And it didn't quite happen. And the Chiefs, though, at the back end of the season, yes, they went down and beat our boys, the Hurricanes, but they couldn't quite get over the line against the Blues. To come to Eden Park for a start, to blank them in the second half, it's only round one, but what does that say to you about them and what it'll tell them?
Oh, I think, well, first off, I think that victory at Eden Park would have been very, very enjoyable for them. And you could see it out there, a lot of the body language throughout the game. Once the Chiefs sort of knew that they were winning that arm wrestle in the second half. If you have a good look at when Damien McKenzie scored his first try, he really gave it to Finlay Christie.
Well, Christie came across, and I thought clubbed him across the back of the head, actually. There was a few words exchanged there.
And you could see out there that they weren't short of a word. Caleb Clark in the semi-final incident as well. That, these are All Blacks going at each other. So you can really...
It's good to see, isn't it?
It was great to see the fact that they're really passionate for their Super Rugby teams. So I think that big emotional hit that they would have got out of that going forward, because they already know they're a good team. They didn't make the final last year by accident.
Yeah, good point.
That they now know that, like, okay, we had another crack at this. Yes, it wasn't a final, but there were a lot of expectations on it. No, I don't think many people were probably thinking they were going to win that game, but that it was going to be closer than last year. And they actually won it running away. Let's face it. They completely dominated that second half. So plenty of good stuff out of there. And the fact that, like I said before, McMillan used his squad really well. And that's a team where all the parts seem to be fitting together quite nicely.
So the Aussie teams, 3 of them win. This obviously means that now they've got a much better chance in the Bledisloe Cup and against the Lions, right? Let's do the longbow.
Well, yeah, obviously it's a huge few years coming up for Rugby Australia and the sport of rugby union in Australia with the Lions tour, which is going to be massive, like sort of no matter what happens. And then you've got a World Cup, which is going to be massive no matter what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
So the onus was really on these Super Rugby teams to leverage the amount of eyeballs that are just going to be on the sport. And this couldn't have got off to a better start because, like I said before, if the Waratahs can be a decent team, all of a sudden you'll be bringing big crowds into a good stadium at Sydney, getting media coverage, and all of a sudden rugby union doesn't just become something for Australians that just pops up whenever they play the All Blacks, because that's kind of the way it works over there. So in order for them to be a relevant discussion for 365 days a year, they need these teams to be playing well. They've already got off to a good start with the Waratahs, signing Joseph Soaili, who's probably already, been worth the money that they paid for him already,
Mate,
and the effort that
yeah.
they took to get him, because of the amount of impact that he's having on games and the fact that he's just a story
He's a
in
crowd
himself,
pleaser, mate. Yeah,
and the
he's bringing
fact
the
that
crowd
Stan
down.
Sport are just going absolutely all out to just cover every single thing he does, which is one thing that they do really well in Australia, is to hype up their own individual athletes. So, it's something which we should probably get used to, because just by the nature of what's happening with rugby in Australia, like, they kind of have to get better, because there's so much more money and attention going to be put into them this year. But it is worth remembering them, and I think maybe you should point this out to Christy, that the Lions versus Australia is very much a battle of the also-rans in World Rugby, at least according to the last World Cup, and that we're going to see the main event at Eden Park in
The main, of
September,
course, mate.
when the All Blacks play the Springboks.
Just before we go, so the Warriors smack Melbourne, read into that whatever you want. The Black Caps have won 4 in a row going into the Champions Trophy.
Yeah, not bad of a weekend though. Was it? Although I think the Storm brought over their under-20s team for that one. But I think that the Black Caps once again going into an ICC tournament full of confidence. I'll back them to go pretty deep, because that's what they always do. If they can win it, if they can do what the White Ferns did last year and just pull off a shock win, I'll be right behind them.
And it's just so cool to sit here after a weekend, isn't it? And just think, well, yeah, there you go, Super Rugby. We were all asking it. We all wanted it to happen. The entertainment factor was right up there. You can't deny that.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I've been saying for years now. I've been talking to you about it. You can't argue with the product that Super Rugby puts on. It's just all of the other crap around it that we seem to get sick of. And, it's not an accident that 26,000 people show up to Eden Park to watch the Blues play.
Great crowd.
There's going to be a really good crowd on Friday in Hamilton. The Chiefs always get good support on a Friday night, and it's just a case of making sure that the discussion around everything else stays positive. I think they're doing a great job with the referees, with the TMOs, to the point where World Rugby is basically trying to copy what Super Rugby's doing, which is a great endorsement of what of the way that they're handling it and trying to speed the game up. So I think that as a product, you can't argue with it. Numbers are going to be high, and I look forward to talking to you about it for the next 17 or so weeks.
DSPN.